Good morning. Good morning, everyone. And it's good to see you all here today. So, well, we've been discussing the Lotus Sutra, or the Dharma Flower Sutra, as it's sometimes called. And last week we sort of reached the end of the sutra proper. And then there are some appended chapters that traditionally have been added on at the end. And there are about 6 of them. And the first of them is called Previous Lives of the Medicine King Bodhisattva. And the first time I read this, I thought, well, I think we better skip this. We we better just go beyond this because it's too weird. And I've got an excuse because it's an appended chapter. And but then I read it again and again and started to appreciate it more and thought, well, let's try to talk about it. Let's try to talk about this chapter. I'd like to start with a couple warnings, which will become, the need for them will become evident as we go through the chapter itself. First of all, this chapter contains episodes of self-injury. Some of you may be sensitive to that. But I would strongly advise that if by this time in thinking about and talking about the Lotus Sutra, you are still taking it literally, now is the time to abandon literal interpretation. The Lotus Sutra is not to be taken literally. It is a allegory or a mythological text to be experienced. It is not a history of events. So I think I'll just go through first the plot of the chapter, Previous Lives of the Medicine King Bodhisattva, and then we'll discuss it some more, and I'll read some passages. So, well, first of all, who was Medicine King Bodhisattva? This is a mythological figure, as the other bodhisattvas are. And Medicine King Bodhisattva travels around aiding those who are sick or ailing. Thus the name Medicine King Bodhisattva. So in this chapter, it starts in a way that many of the chapters of the Lotus Sutra do start, in that someone is asking the Buddha a question. And in this case, Constellation King Flower Bodhisattva is asking Shakyamuni Buddha, our Buddha, the historical Buddha, why does the Medicine King Bodhisattva travel around the world? Why does he travel around the world? And then the Buddha goes into this description that seems to start far afield from the answer to the question. And he describes a time long, long ago, many, many eons ago, when there was a Buddha. And remember, in the Lotus Sutra, there had been countless Buddhas in countless past eons and in countless worlds. But there was a Buddha named Pure and Bright Excellence of the Sun and Moon, Tathagata. Tathagata being another word for Buddha. And a student of this Buddha was seen with joy by the living. Seen with joy by all the living was his name. And pure and bright excellence of sun and moon, Tathagata, teaches, seen with joy by all the living, the Dharma Flower Sutra, the Lotus Sutra that we have been studying. And as a result, seen with joy by all the living attains a special power, the power to obtain any form, to appear in any form. So he's quite grateful to his teacher and offers all kinds of abundant treasures as a gift, as an offering to his teacher, and makes all kinds of devotional practices in gratitude for this teaching. But this seen by joy with all the living has a sort of a temperamental bent, and he always seems to think that whatever he's done is not quite enough. So he says, well, shouldn't I just offer my body to pure and bright excellence of sun and moon, Tathagata? So he goes through an exercise of anointing himself with oils, and then he lights himself on fire and burns for 1,200 years. And this fire just lights up all the different worlds, and all the Buddhas in all these different worlds praise what seen with joy by all the living has done. So after this 1,200 years, he returns in another life, this seen with joy by all the living, and has, as it turns out, the same name. And the Buddha, pure and bright excellence of the sun and moon, Tathagata, is still alive. The Buddhas, and many, many eons ago, used to live for a long time, as you can tell. So he's still alive, but he's on the verge of dying. He's reaching the end of his lifetime. Seen by joy with by all the living arrives in time to be with him during his final hours. And after the death of his teacher, he makes offerings. And among the offerings he makes, there are many, many of them, but among the offerings are 84,000 stupas that he builds. But as we know from his previous life, he has this temperamental bent on never having given enough, and he then burns off both of his arms as an offering. But he says, having thrown away both my arms, I certainly will obtain a Buddha's golden body. If this is true, let my arms be restored. And they were. His arms were restored. And then Shakyamuni Buddha, who's sort of telling this tale, reveals to us that seen with joy by all the living, was a prior manifestation, a prior lifetime of the medicine Buddha, of the medicine king Bodhisattva. So one might think, unfortunately, over the years in China, some people did sort of take this literally and made such offerings of various sorts. But really, sacrificing one's human life or mutilating one's body really flies in the face of some very basic Buddhist teachings. For instance, the Buddha talks about how precious a human life is. How precious a human life is. He says in this sutta from the Pali Canon, monks, suppose that this great earth were totally covered with water and a man were to toss a yoke with a single hole there. A wind from the east would push it west, a wind from the west would push it east, a wind from the north would push it south, a wind from the south would push it north. And suppose there was a blind sea turtle and it would come to the surface once every 100 years. Now, what do you think? Would that blind sea turtle coming to the surface once every 100 years stick his neck into the yoke of a single hole? Into the yoke with a single hole? Well, his listener responds, it would be sheer coincidence, Lord, that a blind sea turtle coming to the surface once every 100 years would stick his neck into the yoke with a single hole. The Buddha goes on. It is likewise sheer coincidence that one obtains the human state. It's likewise a sheer coincidence that a Tathagata, worthy and rightly self-awakened, arises in the world. It's likewise a sheer coincidence that a doctrine and discipline expounded by the Tathagata appears in the world. Now, this human state has been obtained. A Tathagata, worthy and rightly self-awakened, has arisen in the world. A doctrine and discipline expounded by a Tathagata appears in the world. Therefore, your duty is the contemplation. This is stress. This is the origination of stress. This is the cessation of stress. Your duty is the contemplation. This is the path of practice leading to the cessation of stress. In other words, the teachings of the Buddha, the Four Noble Truths. And in the Buddha's first teaching, again from the Pali Canon, his first teaching after 6 years of ascetic practice, during which time he engaged in all kinds of difficult and painful exercises. After 6 years of this, in his first teaching, he said this: there are two extremes that are not to be indulged in by one who has gone forth. Which two? That which is devoted to sensual pleasure with reference to sensual objects, base, vulgar, common, ignoble, unprofitable, and that which is devoted to self-affliction, painful, ignoble, unprofitable. Avoiding both of these extremes, the middle way realized by the Tathagata produces vision, knowledge, leads to calm, to direct knowledge, to self-awakening, and to unbinding, freedom. And what is the middle way realized by the Tathagata? That producing vision, producing knowledge, leads to calm, to direct knowledge, to self-awakening, to unbinding. Precisely this noble eightfold path: right view, right resolve, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. This is the middle way realized by the Tathagata. That, producing vision, producing knowledge, leads to calm, to direct knowledge, to self-awakening, and to unbinding. So the Buddha never really advocated any kind of human sacrifice or self-mutilation, much to the contrary. So what is this story about? What are we to make of it? If it's not about that, then what is it about? Well, I'll just offer some thoughts on that. First of all, I think it is about commitment, a show of commitment, of wholeheartedness. And we can compare a story about Bodhidharma and Huike. Huike was someone who wanted to be taught by Bodhidharma, the ancient Chinese Zen teacher. And Bodhidharma was in a cave meditating, and Huike came to the mouth of the cave and requested to be a student, requested teachings. And Bodhidharma just ignored him. And it, as the story goes, it was snowing, it was kind of miserable out, and Huike came back the next day, made the same request, came back the following day, made the same request, and got the same response of being ignored. And finally, Huike cut off his arm and threw it into the cave, and Bodhidharma saw it and accepted Huike as a student. So I think this is it's a symbol for wholeheartedness, for commitment is one thing. And also it's about gratitude for the teachings that we have been offered from those in the past and in the present that have helped guide us in a direction that is worthy and wholesome. And it's about devotion to those teachings and to the Dharma. The Dharma is defined various ways, but one way it's defined is just the teachings of the Buddha, but it's also translated as law and refers to more or less the law of the universe, the way things are, Dharma, the way things are. Another thing this is about is generosity, the willingness to give what is important to you. In traditional Buddhist teachings, there are three kinds of gifts. There are the gifts of material goods, and we all understand that. And there's the gift of no fear, of dispelling fear in those around you, of being, in a sense, harmless, of non-harming, of being safe to be around. That's a gift. And then what's said to be the highest gift is a gift of the Dharma, of pointing one toward a direction in their life that is wholesome and fulfilling. And the story is also about the pricelessness of the Dharma. And there are some readings from the chapter that I think express some of these points. So the Buddhas who are witnessing the seen by joy with all living beings, his exercise of immolation, say, "Good son, this is called the greatest gift, the highly regarded and supreme of gifts, because it is an offering of the Dharma to the Tathagatas." How do we offer the Dharma? we've talked about this before, and there are some, there's sort of 4 guidelines for offering the Dharma, to how you offer these teachings. And the first is kind speech. Kind speech, benevolent action, acting for the good of oneself and others. And this would be the long-term good of oneself and others. And the third would be generosity. And the fourth would be what's sometimes translated as identity action or non-difference, meaning not making a distinction between self and other, not making the usual distinction between self and other. And of course, we all distinguish between self and other. But there is a way in which we can transcend that difference. And go beyond that usual worldly interpretation of things. So, offering the Dharma to the Tathagatas. And then the Buddha is talking at the end to Constellation King Flower Bodhisattva, who asked the original question. Even if someone were to give a 3,000 great 1,000-fold world full of 7 precious materials as an offering to the Buddha, great bodhisattvas, arhats, the blessings of such person, the blessings that such person would gain would not equal those of someone who receives and embraces a single 4-line verse of this Dharma Flower Sutra. Happiness greater than this won't be found. And he goes on, the sutra can bring great and abundant benefit to all the living and fulfill their hopes. Just like a clear, cool pool, it can satisfy all who are thirsty. Like fire to someone who is cold, like clothing to someone naked, like a leader found by a group of merchants, like a mother found by her children, like a ferry found by passengers, like a doctor found by the sick, like a lamp found by people in the dark, like riches found by the poor, like a ruler found by the people, like a sea lane found by traders, and like a torch dispelling the darkness. This Dharma Flower Sutra can enable all the living to liberate themselves from all suffering, disease, and pain, loosening all the bonds of mortal life. Therefore, Constellation King Flower, I entrust this chapter of the previous lives of Medicine King to you. After my extinction in that last 500 years, proclaim and spread it widely throughout the Jambudvida. That's the name for our world here, the earth here now. Never let it die, or the evil devil, the devil's people, gods, dragons, satyrs, and kumbhandas will gain the upper hand. Constellation King Flower, use your divine powers to guard and protect this sutra. Why? Because this sutra is good medicine for the ills of the people of Jambudvipa. If anyone is sick When they hear this sutra, their sickness will quickly disappear, and they will neither grow old nor die. Constellation King Flower, if you see someone who receives and embraces this sutra, you should scatter blue lotus flowers with powdered incense heaped upon them. After scattering them, you should think to yourself, before long, surely this person will take a grass mat and sit at the place of the way, defeat the armies of the devil, and blowing the conch of the Dharma and beating the drum of the great Dharma, save all living beings from the sea of old age, sickness, and death. Now, I think we all know that old age, sickness, and death are inevitable if you don't die young. And likewise, I think disability and death are inevitable for us. I guess if you're young and get hit by a bus, you never experience disability if you aren't disabled already. But as we grow older, there's necessarily certain disabilities and death to follow. I think another message of this sutra, of this chapter, is that those aren't the worst things that can happen to someone. They're not the worst, disability and death. The worst is losing one's way. Just to lose one's way spiritually, which from a Buddhist perspective, which is just one perspective, but from a Buddhist perspective, it's forgetting about the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Forgetting about our refuge. And this is worse than disability and death. So I guess the question I would leave us with today is, in what manner are these teachings helpful in saving us from old age, sickness, and death? What does it mean to be saved from old age, sickness, and death? A recurrent theme in Buddhist literature. So I think we'll stop there, and we'll go into breakout rooms. And I'd be interested when we come back together in thoughts about this rather odd chapter and the question of old age, sickness, and death. Thank you for listening today.